Everyone, thank you for this invitation, Jam and Diana. Diana asked me to be here to mainly talk about my engagement with Maceda as an art historian, curator, and scholar. So I think I was able to identify five modes of engagement with Maceda. So I just walk you through his engagements. No? So the first one is the Philippine Contemporary, which is an exhibition of Philippine art from the first half of the 20th century to the present. It is currently at the Metropolitan Museum of Manila along Rojas Boulevard. So it is basically a survey of art from that period to the present. No? So I included Maceda's work in the section called Trajectory, which covers the years 1965 to 1983. So I was thinking when doing this survey exhibition to widen or broaden the field or scope of Philippine art, visual art, to include other forms of creative practice like moving image, short film, sound and performance. No? So it was not only an exhibition of sculpture, painting, or print, as we have known, but also included other things besides these more well-known forms. No? So for instance, I included comics on your upper left, or alongside painting and sculpture, and photography, for instance, on your left, and early documentary from Romeo Pickford on your right. So these forms converse with the art history of the periods. No? So this is how I located Maceda in the section called Trajectory. So with I think somewhere there, you don't see the vitrine. I prepared a vitrine on Ugnayan, no? Which Diane earlier showed. So the First Lady, Imelda Marcos, conceived of the Cultural Center of the Philippines in the 60s and finally opened it in 1969. So this was the period where I also tried to locate Maceda within that, let us say, CCP period, because his music and sound were also part of CCP projects. Specifically, I think two, no? Ugnayan in 74 and Cassettes 100 in 71. No? So the presence of the CCP helped Philippine modernism take a decisively international turn. It became one of the main nodes in the network of situations that may be described as avant-garde. Within the relay of the discourses of development, identity, and democracy, this kind of avant-garde could be gleaned in the various initiations in the center that evoked a world suddenly turning visible, which was the phrase of one of its curators, Raimundo Albano. So the reclamation of around 77 hectares of foreshore land from Manila Bay, the exhibitions of experimental art, the nationwide performance of the music of indigenous instruments through transistor radios by way of Jose Maceda's music concrete exercise titled Ugnayan, the translation of modernist plays and operas into the local language, and the resistance of politicized art against the cultural policy of the state, all this created an atmosphere of modernism that was conscious of locality and worldliness, of the avant-garde and the ancient. So this, I think, the first, I'd like to show this as one of my first my first engagements with Maceda, no? To locate him as part of this wider history of creative culture in the Philippines. The second one has something to do with an archival project I did for the Gwangju Asian Art Center. They asked me to do something on the period 1960 to 1989. And so I tried to organize the archival project around categories: the Imelda Marcos Art Program, the Independent Cinema Movement, the Philippine Educational Theatre Association, which was at that time also involved with Bertolt Brecht, Social Realism, which was against the Imelda Marcos Art Program and also the dictatorship in general. And then Art Beyond Manila might be found under the first category, Imelda Marcos Art Program, in relation to the production of infrastructure through the Cultural Center of the Philippines, the emergence of this concept of developmental art at the CCP, the speeches of Mrs. Marcos on culture, and the events related to that. So this is the CCP. It was reclaimed from Manila Bay, part of Manila Bay, 77 hectares I think, and then turned it into a cultural complex. No? So this is the, turning water into land was in itself. You take an avant-garde moment with Mrs. Marcos as the both artist and architect. So there were several experiments at the center. So you had visual art, theater, and of course Maceda's Cassettes 100 at the middle part. No? So Maceda will be part of this experimental program at the center. So the project was called Ugnayan, meaning connection. No? I think was supposed to be a contraction of two words. Ugat natin yan, which means those are our roots. No? So, but I think Mrs. Marcos wanted this Ugnayan. So she was proud to say that it was she who thought of the term. But this was really her project, under her auspices at least. The project of the CCP in association with public and private institutions. Imelda Marcos was the chairman of the Cultural Center of the Philippines, and at the same time the First Lady. And at some point, the Minister of Human Settlements and also the Governor of Manila. So she was quite present. She was quite present in the city. And so, so this is, I think, Dayang already showed this to you. The watershed project of Nayan or connection is instructive in this regard. Its sources were music, concrete, atmosphere, waves, clouds, electronic technology, and shared labor and cooperation of large numbers of people as a form of technology. It aimed for the synthesis of ethnomusicologist and composition as well as temporalities, that is the past and the present. According to Ramon Santos, the musicologist, the construction of Ugnayan consists of 20 51-minute layers of recorded sounds, mostly from ethnic instruments, each layer to be broadcast by one of the 37 radio stations authorized to operate in Metro Manila. All stations were to be synchronized to start the broadcast exactly from 6 to 7 p.m. on New Year's Day of 1974, during which no other sound would be heard on Philippine airwaves. So I think this kind of project needs some kind of dictatorship too. So a nationwide campaign called for people to come out of their homes, bring their transistor radios, and congregate in parks. No? So this is the publicity material to inform the public about Ugnayan and the radio stations that were involved in the project. So this is an example of how they would congregate in parks or community centers and other public places at the appointed time. So earlier in 71, Maceda staged a 30-minute project called Cassettes 100, performed by 100 participants carrying cassette recorders, which played multiple tracks. As they moved around the cultural center along an erratic choreographic program, and amid the visual art and lighting design of well-known practitioners. And it had iterations of the at other places, that year and then afterward. So the third engagement would be my interest in a certain Pan-Asian identity, and also some kind of neo-ethnic expression that responded to this Pan-Asian aspiration. And part of this takes me to Maceda. In 1932 in Manila, Wenceslao Vinsons delivered a speech titled Malaysia Irredenta. It advocated to recover a potentially extensive Malaysia that in his mind had been circumscribed by narrow national boundaries in the long process of the struggle for emancipation and foreign control. In his compelling address, he urged his audience to work towards a renewed racial vitality that would give birth to a new nationalism, that of Malaysia redeemed. So Malaysia in this case includes the Philippines. So it was a greater, this almost pan-Asian thing. So this presentation, so it explored the trajectory of the speech, traced the impulses as well as the consequences of a widely conceived Malaysian continuum, extending from the northern extremity of the Malay Peninsula to the shores of New Guinea, from Madagascar to the Philippines and the remotest islands of Polynesia. This polemic was both a geopolitical and civilizational aspiration, and was aesthetically articulated across various moments of practice, embodied by Vinson's colleagues, including the diplomat writer Carlos P. Romulo and the politician and future Philippine President Gustavo Macapagal. They were all part of an organization called Young Philippines, which was formed by Vinsons. Romulo and Macapagal were in fact delegates to the Asian African Conference in Bandung, Indonesia in 1955. Another member of Young Philippines was Aurelio Albero. He became a collector and commentator, annotating an exhibition titled the First Non-Objective Art Exhibition in the Philippines in 1953, in which he reveals his advanced nativist, nationalist, and avant-garde dispositions. From this conception of the redeemed homeland of Wenceslao Vinsons emerged a greater territory beyond nation or region, as well as efforts to gather both discourse and creative agency by way of conferences and exhibitions. So this is where I locate Maceda. So exemplary in this regard was the first Asian Music Conference, music conference, or the first Southeast Asian Regional Music Conference held in 1956 in Manila. So this is annotation, this report of that conference in Manila from Free Work, which I think CIA publication. This is the conference at the time at the University of the Philippines, no? And Maceda was a delegate in this conference. So, for instance, you will see there, like lower right, an interesting speech tracing similarities of music idioms of East and West was made by Philippine musicologist Jose Maceda. He pointed out the split sounds and thin instrumentation common in Japanese music, in the Spanish composition of Di Falla, in dance music of Sumatra, and in European dance tunes, and the similarities of note patterns and fluidity of melodic line in Thai music and Balinese gamelans, the compositions of Beethoven, Mendelssohn, and Ravel. So this was, I think, an effort of Maceda, also the conference, to have this almost something that would transcend an East-West divide and demonstrate or argue for some kind of confluence, no, in music at least. No? And in 1966, Maceda himself would convene a conference called Musics of Asia, International Music Symposium, organized by the National Music Council of the Philippines in cooperation with UNESCO Philippines. No? So we can see here that the elements were still part of the effort of Maceda to transcend the divide, no, between the East and West, and gather together musicians from different parts of the world and convening them for a conference and also for a concert. So you can see the program here. You have speakers like Yanis Sinakis, no? And you also have a concert with music from Cage or Takemitsu, and also from Kulintang, Porta Kulintang from the Philippines, and orchestral numbers from Maceda himself and Sinakis. Of course, this was also organized under the auspices of Mrs. Marcos. So the last part of the program you have to be with Mrs. Marcos. Some kind of laying in the cornerstone. So Maceda would characterize this particular event as keeping in step with the avant-garde direction. In cadence, in fact, it started to emerge in Tokyo in 1961, which Maceda fixes as the period of the introduction of the avant-garde in East Asia. According to him, this was followed in Manila a few years later with the music of Sinakis, Barres, Boulez, and Delu, which was played in the same program with the traditional musics of Asia. The Chinese Nanguman Ansam, the Indian sitar as played by Ravi Shankar, was also in Manila. The Tairanaa as played by Prasid Silap Pabanleng, and the Philippine Kulintang as played by Amal Lemuntod. Having said this, Maceda acknowledges that the interest of the avant-garde in the exploration of sound phenomena may find satisfaction in part in some Asian musics, in which a different value is attributed to the structure of scales, where many instruments do not have a focused pitch, and where sounds are connected with emotions in a very different way. So these are just examples of the scenes of the conference in Manila in '66, and also some pictures with those who attended the conference. And the concert here, in film life, and the principal speakers and panel commentators, no? Thailand and Korea, Japan, and then of course other places too. No? The fourth engagement I have with Maceda has something to do with architecture. I was asked by owned by the Osorios, and they built the church partly to contain an emerging insurgency in the place in Negros. No? So they hired Antonin Raymond and Ladislav Rado, who had a firm, I think, based in Tokyo, Raymond and Rado. So Raymond was a collaborator of Frank Lloyd Wright for some projects in Tokyo, and Rado was a peer of Walter Gropius. So it's interesting that they had this project in Manila, and the Chapel of Holy Sacrifice was the work of Leandro Locsin, Philippine modernist. So some examples. This is the work of Raymond and Rado in Negros in Bacolod, with this famous mural of Christ at the altar. Now, they call it the Angry Christ, but this is just a common term for that, because this is actually not the title of the work. Alfonso Osorio was born as an early collector of Pollock and Dibuque. Yeah, so, and he very important, and I think he has been recovered from art history in more recent Church of the Holy Sacrifice at the University of the Philippines in 68. So this is the writing also from the Maceda archive. So I think Maceda thought of the place, no, as the site for the performance. So here we see how architecture and music came together as part of an emerging avant-garde language of the Philippines. So the fifth engagement with Maceda is a bit tangential. I was asked by artists Enzo Camacho and Amy Lien to write for the catalog of their show in Milan. And they did something about this satellite, this thing that picks up sound when the viewer comes in. This was in Block 50 in Milan. So I said, what do you want me to contribute? Because this would be anything. So I thought of the satellite program of the Marcos government, and which also I think was related to Ugnayan, the effort to unite this country, to unite the archipelago under through domestic satellite and also through radio in the case of Maceda. So I quote, for instance, Ferdinand Marcos when he said that I have just turned on the switch which is supposed to connect Manila with Zamboanga and Cagayan de Oro through domestic satellite. This is certainly a dream come true, to be able to broadcast from Maharlika Hall, which is the presidential palace, and be seen and heard not only in Manila but throughout the length and breadth of the country. This, of course, is the dream that we have always had, and I see now the first step towards the attainment of such a dream. I gather that I will be heard now not only in Zamboanga, but also in parts of Basilan, parts of Sulu, as well as Cagayan de Oro and environs. I look forward to the day when whatever is said in Manila will be heard by every Filipino in every village. So the DOMSAT, the domestic satellite in the Philippines, tapped into the Indonesian satellite, actually, system called PALAPA, a project of President Suharto, who, like Marcos, sought to collect the vast polyethnic population of Indonesia under the auspices of an integrated Indonesian nation. PALAPA was built in 1976, and according to the scholar Joshua Barker, it was the first of its kind in the developing world. Costing an estimated $1 billion, its initial incarnation consisted of a single geostationary satellite orbiting more than 22,300 miles above the Earth's surface, relaying television and telephone signals to some 50 Earth stations. And the Philippine satellite tapped into this. So in 1977, a working group meeting on the Philippines-Indonesian border communications convened and agreed that the use of Indonesia's PALAPA satellite is a practical way to provide high-capacity and reliable circuit for border communication between Davao City and Manado in Indonesia. So this is also one engagement with Maceda, but also of being tangential. And then finally, I was asked recently to contribute to a symposium in Arles under the theme How Institutions Think, and also more recently in Ljubljana, Glossary of Common Knowledge, the museum, the Modern Art Museum in Ljubljana in Slovenia. So in these two projects, I proposed a notion of alternating. The notion of alternating, a theoretical concept that, for me, responds to this predicament of mediating institutions or institutionality. For me, and I will end here, the alternating this, and I also indicate Maceda at some point. So this alternating, this interval of possibility, this rhythm that shapes the life force of the world suddenly turning visible from Albano, is a rhythm of an impasse and therefore of an opportunity in the tenor of Derrida. Such inflection is referenced by the Philippine term antala, a delay or gap that is also a chance, usually a slit of a prospect. that needs to be urgently dwelled in or worked through tropically, in the sense of a sudden turning, in the words of Albano, of both earth and language. Perhaps it might be useful to finally return to the ethnomusicologist and composer Jose Maceda and take up his conceptualization of the fifth interval in music as a device of bipolarity and also of order. In the music of Europe since the medieval period, Maceda contends the fifth interval was a language of unity through the artifice of harmony and polyphony. Elsewhere, like in the Javanese gamelan, it was a language of diverse oppositions that gave rise to, instead of precision, hierarchy, and isolation, as in the European music, it instead gave rise to a lush atmosphere of color, of non-ideas of resignation, renunciation, and abandon. Indeed, the interval in the sonic order of Jose Maceda is, I think,